this thing on? It is. All right, welcome everybody to Art for Social Impact. I'm really excited to be here with this esteemed group of panelists. My name is Brandon Colvin. I am the owner of Canvas Detroit, which is an art engagement platform. Started here in Detroit in 2013. And we do quite a bit of work, we have done quite a bit of work around the city, but most of it really focused on the very topic that we're here to discuss today, art for social impact. How do we leverage the power of art is one of our main questions that we seek to answer and that our work hopefully reflects. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists and also give them the opportunity to expound on their identities as artists and creatives. To my right is Rochelle Riley, who is the Director of Arts and Culture for the City of Detroit. To my left is, full disclosure, a dear friend of mine and also incredibly talented multidisciplinary artist. Also one of the very few creatives, women in metalwork. There are not a lot of women, particularly women of color, who are as skilled and accomplished as Tiff Massey. And metalwork is not all that she does, but Tiff Massey to my left. To the left of Tiff is also a multidisciplinary media artist, Nora Al-Badri. She is joining us from Germany. She's an Iraqi-German creative, and we're really excited to have her here with us today. And last but certainly not least, rounding out our panel is Andreas Görgen. I want to make sure I pronounce your name correctly, Andreas. And we are especially excited to have Andreas with us because he is a large part of why we're even here today. He is the Director of Communications and Culture. Is that correct? Okay, I want to make sure I get it right. And he is also very heavily responsible for Republica's involvement here in the Wonder Bar together. So this partnership between Berlin and Detroit, between Germany and the United States, he has had a very heavy hand and a very generous hand in helping create. So we're really excited to have him here as well. Yay! So I would really like to kick the panel off with talking about the meaning of art for social impact, how it informs the practice and the professional work of everyone here sitting on the panel. And if Rochelle Riley, who is our dear representative from Detroit, would love to kick that off. We'd love to hear about how your work presently and even formally, because this is a new position for you, and talk to us a little bit about how social impact and how you envision art being leveraged for that purpose.
Thank you so much for having me. The last time I was in this room, it was just when my job was announced. So in the 4 months that I've been doing this, I have created a department that doesn't exist yet. I give my proposal to the mayor on Monday, but it is all about relationships and partnerships and support for artists who have been working for so long in our city without support. So my first job is partner. All art, one would hope, means that you have a connection between intent and result. If you get the result you hope for, then awesome. But even if you don't, if it causes people to feel something, that's great. And I think what we have is a lot of people who are doing art because they love it and because they want to express a message, but they haven't had enough of a platform, enough notoriety to make sure that people see it. Because I've seen art that if people had a chance to see what it would do, it could change lots of things. I mean, not just emotionally, but culturally, spiritually, and sometimes politically. So I'm very interested in making sure that all of our artists, those who are so-called controversial, and those who literally create for joy, that can lead to other things, have a space to do that. So in the New Detroit, that's what we're doing, whether we're doing it in all the neighborhoods or making sure that there are spaces for our young people to paint, because they have, and I use paint generally, but to create their art, they have amazing things that they want to do, and they don't feel like they have the space for anyone to hear them and to see them. I want to make sure that they know that I see them.
Thank you very much for that. Tiff, would you like to weigh in on your relationship to art and even how you leverage art personally and professionally for social impact?
I just want to say thank you for coming, and I'm happy to be here. And I just want to start off by saying what up, though, because that's
What up, though?
how we say hello in Detroit. I'm an interdisciplinary artist, and I'm classically trained as a metalsmith. And with that, there's a level of rarity within my art practice. I don't really know too many African descent artists that are primarily practicing in that way. So as far as like social impact, there's like several things that are on my radar as far as like passion projects. And that's when I do a large commission, I go and I put my money where my mouth is and I go buy some real estate. Because I'm very critical about what happens on the grounds of Detroit. And I talk about it quite often. And so it's one thing for me to talk about it, but then there's another thing for me to be about it. And so in 2017, I bought what I thought was going to be my permanent studio. I'm pretty much primarily moved my practice to sculpture, so I need a lot of space to do what I do. It's hard to hold down space in Detroit still, even with me owning property. So I saw some kids walking by in the neighborhood in which I grew up, because that's where I purchased the property. And I'm like, where are they going? There's nothing to do here. My mom had to drive me an hour outside of the city just for me to be exposed to metalsmithing. So I'm like, they need to come over here and build some shit. So I've basically been trying to, with my professional practice, try to build my version of Cranbrook Academy of Art, which is my alma mater, in which I received my master's and my MFA, concentrating in metalsmithing. So as far as, thank you. Yeah, I was the only black woman on campus, so yeah, it was real. So as far as like my practice, I'm trying to create an institution that the kids in my neighborhood don't have to go far outside of it to maybe be included in the scene. And I would like to also empower my colleagues by giving them jobs and housing and studios as well, so I can create this cyclical system so they can see reflection of themselves in these spaces, because that's very important as well. So that's one. And then the other one is, because I'm a sculptor and a metalsmith, I really want to come for Sir Anish Kapoor. And I want to build Detroit's version of the bean. So, you know, you guys, I'm waiting for you to make it rain on me so we can make that thing pop.
Before you go to the next person, I want to make sure that you understand, I was applauding because she's trying to create a Cranbrook in Detroit. And that deserves some applause, because one of the things that we have to stop doing is seeing the brightest of our kids have to drive an hour or even a half an hour someplace else to get what they need. So thank you.
Nora, please feel free to respond as well about how you incorporate art for social impact into your practice.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thanks for having me. And I don't know really where to start, because it's my first visit to Detroit. I'm very mind blown from what's going on here. And so there are so many things I want to say, but I'll start with one. And I think it's like there are many parallels to Berlin, so that's where I'm based. We have a lot of gentrification going on, and because the name of the panel in the first moment kind of was weird to me, like impact is a quantification. So I like to think a bit more about social change, not impact, but that's just a word thing. Yet I would like to share a few statistics so you understand the situation in Berlin, how it is with housing spaces for artists. So for example, the average income of a female artist per year in Berlin is 8,000 euro. Of a male Berliner artist is 10,000. So it's really nothing. It's like everywhere precarity. Of course, we have many superstars artists, but these are just a few of all of them. And I think overall, maybe 20% of our artists can actually live from their art. And I'm in the moment lucky to be one of them, but it's still very precarious. And the housing situation is very difficult. And just in the neighborhood where I live, it's very infamous Kreuzberg. We have seen a rise of rents of 70% in the past 10 years. So it's really happening. But before I discussed with Laura after the keynote about what's this moment actually right now. And I think, you know, in Berlin, we are luckily many artists. So we just started to fight it back. And I'm very optimistic about it because I deeply believe, of course, as an artist, that the society needs art. And the other way around, artists don't work in a vacuum. And in this kind of, I think, quite radical times, because we are really wretched and suppressed in many ways and commodified, we are just starting to fight back. And because my practice is mainly in media arts, so a lot of reflections and also critique about technology, but actually I like to think a bit more positive in that way. I like to see the emancipatory potential in technology. Because just to give you an example, in Germany, like I do work a lot on museums, about the questions of representations and how all of that plays out basically. Like when we have material objects of other cultures in our museums. So yesterday I was in the Detroit Institute of Arts and I saw beautiful things from Iraq, for example. So I can see that in Berlin too, but also a little bit in Iraq, but not so much. So these are questions I'm very interested in, and technology can help us actually create some emancipatory spaces. And by that, I mean this kind of unlearning of how we grew up in a way. I use the term decolonization a lot. And actually, when I heard about like violence here, I thought about a quotation. I always use it because I love it. It's from Frantz Fanon, and it's on what does decolonization actually mean, and I think it applies a lot to Detroit here. So what is decolonization? It's first and foremost about self-ownership. They are struggles to repossess, to take back, if necessary by force, that which is ours unconditionally and as such belongs to us. And I think maybe that's where we are now. Thank you.
Well, first of all, congrats to you. First time we met here in Detroit, you was just announcing to step into your office, and I'm very, very pleased to see that you have, that the success is with you, and all we can do is support you in that approach for two reasons. First of all, I'm part of a very ancient administration. There are 100 years. Next year will be 100 years of cultural policies of Germany. And the foundation is an imperialist and a colonialist approach. We founded schools abroad, we did cultural policies in order to be part of that power-ruled world. And we are actually operating a shift towards a policy which is an anti-liberal progressive policy. So this is in economical terms, it's quite close to the theory that infrastructure has been taken out of the market. Cultural infrastructure, wealth, health systems, energy, transport. It is an economy which is not based on the products and the services and the costs of the production, but on purpose. And I think it's a very bold step you are taking here in Detroit. by creating such an institution and by squeezing out the arts from a market-driven economy. That's very important, and it's very anti-liberal. Not to say that it's progressive or even, well, you may pronounce that word is a socialist approach, because it's the promise of humanity which is not to be dealt with in a market system. And just referring to Tiff, so what we try to do with policies is to empower and to support financially and politically open spaces which do not belong to the rules of policies, which can criticize, which can do whatever they want, and this is arts and science, and they are protected from the rules of a society. So you have always to manage the tension, and managing the tension means to support Republica by not interfering in what they are doing, to support the Goethe Institute, to invite the Goethe Institute to get even closer to Detroit. That's a part of what we are doing. And the second point I just want to stress for introduction, there are great American artists which are really models for a social engaged art. Think about Susan Lacey. Think about Susan Lacey, one of that great women, and she started in the late 60s, early 70s, to reflect upon labor conditions, to reflect upon the gender conditions in a society, and it's 30 years of work with a high impact even in Europe. But this is a decision to be made by the artists and not to be made by politics. So politics cannot ask an artist to be socially engaged, but an artist may decide to be engaged socially.
And Tiff said a mic drop is in order. So in our introduction, we kind of touched on quite a broad range of things. We talked a little bit about issues of gender. We've talked a bit about issues of politics. We've talked about issues of race and identity. I would like to kick it back to Nora, who just put her microphone down. Nora, you have a degree in political science. Can you talk to us a little bit about how your education as a political scientist informs your work? And you mentioned you put a fine point on using the term social change as opposed to social impact. Also, could you expound a little bit more on the difference as well as your experience as a political scientist and how it informs your work?
Yeah, well, I never got that question, but I'm glad you bring it up because this conference is under the title of Access. So why didn't I study art in the first place? Because I was from a class where to study art was not an option, but to study something with which you might earn money. But now, actually, retrospectively, I'm grateful that I at least had the chance to study something. And there is this very nice German but he's old now, but still German artist who lives in the US now, Hans Hake, and he said, all art is political, and if it's not political, it's also not art. So it does inform my practice a lot, and I guess it completely changed my worldview. It also informed why I like to think about the world of a decentering, or recentering of an artistic practice. So many projects I do them in the Global South. I do exhibit them there and not just exploit the topic of the Global South to show it in our art shows and markets and to sell it or so. So it did influence me a lot, and I'm grateful for this, let's say, foundational knowledge which many artists actually have. You don't need to go to university to study that or to understand, I think, political power structures. I believe many artists do understand that and apply that. So the second question on social change. Yeah, I mean, it was more a word thing, I guess. There's a topic when I don't know, socially engaged practice. I mean, it's something in the art world I was thinking of. For me, it is an important part of my practice, but it's not necessarily always an important part, as Andreas said. Yet, what I saw here when I was walking around Detroit and what I heard here, what's going on, so many community development projects on every corner, basically. And I wanted to say something and also would like to hear from the Detroiters what's that about, because I think a few years ago there was the first Turner Prize given to this architecture collective ensemble for their community project, basically in Liverpool, I think, in a poor neighborhood. They did like many interventions, I would call it. I don't know what, like they did many things probably. Yet it turned out in the end that actually there was a community project running for a long time, and it was really successful, and it was made by the community. But it just got a prize after there was the last finishing, let's say, a Pinselstrich, what is that, a paintbrush, maybe the gloss of the thing, and then they got the art. And then they got that prize, and they got the spotlight. So, yeah, I see many things like that, which are really unfortunate, I think.
Thank you very much for that. I saw there was an audible and palpable response with your mention of a lot of the community engagement work that often is performed and recognized by individuals who aren't necessarily a part of those communities. Tiff or Rochelle, did either of you want to respond to the proliferation of this sort of thing, particularly here in the city of Detroit?
You could go.
I don't think I remember to say this before, but for almost 20 years I was the media. And then I came to this job for my other love, so I have 2 dream jobs in one lifetime. But there has been nothing that has given me more hope and made me more angry than watching the Renaissance in Detroit. And here's what happened. As you will learn in the US, particularly in Detroit, in addition to what up though, we always say, so what had happened was, there were all of these people with land who literally wrote Detroit's obituary and went someplace else. But they kept their plots in the cemetery. So when they found out Detroit wasn't dead, all of a sudden they came back. Now here's what they didn't understand. This cemetery that they thought was a cemetery but wasn't had caretakers. So while we have focused so much on these startups, we haven't focused enough on the been-ups and the people who have been here forever. So if we talk about that through art, one of my jobs, this is not a wish, this is not a mission, this is my duty, is to make sure that I pay attention to the artists who could have gone to New York, who could have gone to Amsterdam, who could have gone to Berlin, who stayed here and have worked here and have done magic here, but without the recognition they deserve. The very first time Jessica Care Moore told me about how much she works outside of Detroit more than inside of Detroit, I wanted to slap somebody. So that is why when we hear people talk about all of the stuff that's going on, and while we are glad, again, I'm very happy. I moved here almost 20 years ago, and there was nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean I worked at the newspaper, and we put out a company put out a press release that there was a car rental company. And they were working on a news story about it. And I was new, and I said, what are you doing? They said, well, it's a business opening, so we have to do a story. That was a long time ago. Now this place is hopping. But if it's not going to hop for everybody, we're not doing what we need. So through art, we have to make sure that everybody has a chance to be heard, to make sure that their voices can lead to whether it's social change or social impact, that they have that opportunity. And people who have been doing it for a long time have just as right to be celebrated as people who have been doing it for 10 minutes.
I mean, do I even need to piggyback with anything that you said? I don't know. Being an artist in Detroit, I don't know. I have a love-hate relationship, actually, what's going on in the city. And I, too, like Jessica Care Moore, have to get on a plane quite often to get support. Yeah, you know, exactly. And you know, I mean, I like getting on the plane sometimes, but I never really thought that that would be really a part of my art practice, you know, so I don't know, but back to Nora, what you were saying about how do we feel about the development, I mean, it's visceral. It's like somebody coming over to your mom's house and just taking half the house out and saying, we want it to look like this now. So, and then that goes too, I mean, like Detroiters, we're really, I mean, we're diehard, we're overprotective of the space. And, you know, I have several colleagues who have bought land who talk about how they're doing like social practice. And they're creating these community gardens, and they get a lot of funding. And then when you really listen, because I'm a really good listener, you hear her say, well, this was about me having a relationship to the dirt. And I'm like, yo, like, are you serious? You know? Also about this project too, there was no plumbing or any type of services in the spaces that were acquired. And so, you know, the new Detroiters that come into these spaces get praised for experiencing this or putting themselves through this, you know, experience. And usually they come from well-affluent families. And you know, they're just coming for the story, you know. I have a body of work, and it's entitled Black Then They Didn't Want Me, Now I'm Hot, They All on Me. And that's very indicative of what is happening in Detroit.
Actually, Tiff, could you say something a little bit more about Black Then They Didn't Want Me, the origins of that project, and even specifically what it means for you in the context of access as an artist and woman of color?
I mean, they love the young white woman who lived in the house with no plumbing. You know, they love that story. They eat that up. I mean, it's very hard to live off of your art practice, just in general, you know, and then I'm a metalsmith, and so then there's a particular cost to the materials before I even touch it. And the tools that are needed. So, you know, yes, I get a lot of attention. A lot of people write about my practice, but I'm a hard-ass working woman, and the work really does reflect it. So I don't know. I mean, I just have a hard time with those projects where you go into cities where people are severely poor and they can't move out of their situation, and then you're highlighting someone who is moving in intentionally to act like they are a savior for the space when there's people in the community who've been holding down that space. And so they could have a farm or something 2 blocks away that's been existing for like 10, 15 years, but what they're concerned about is this new garden, you know, just because of who created it.
Thank you for that, Tiff. This next question is for our 2 panelists who work in within the government context. Nora, initially you mentioned artists in Berlin pushing back, and I'd like to pose this question to Andreas and Rochelle. How do you push back and maybe open up the doors of access in a context like working for state government or city government or a country's government? How do you position yourself to give sort of that pushback? How do you create greater or wider lanes of access for artists, for creatives to increase social change, to increase social impact?
Andreas, do you want to go first?
Well, anyway, my answer will be very disappointing. I'm not part of the cultural administration of Germany, but part of the diplomatic administration, which is dealing with out of Germany. So I can't support any artist in Germany unless he's doing something abroad. So my infrastructure, the infrastructure we finance, we run 1 billion euros a year. And we channel 330 millions to the Goethe Institute. We channel 200 millions to the academic exchange services. We channel 20 million euros to build up a civil society in Russia and the countries east of Europe. We do communications, but we are only doing what we are doing abroad. So my only way to support artists in Germany is to invite them to get out of that comfort zone, which is Germany. It's still a comfort zone. To get out, yeah, I absolutely think so. I absolutely think so. So what we are part of a deeply unjust world. There is still a north-south divide. And we have put up a system which is based on exploitment. And artists can open our eyes to that and can bring. Last week there had been a professor from the Columbia University, Suleiman Bashir Diagne, which is one of the greatest forward thinker of the decolonization. He has been in Berlin. And that was an eye-opener for Berlin, to reflect upon colonialism, to reflect upon what socialism has brought to this world, and there's still a promise. There's still a promise to build up another kind of society than a society based on exploitation.
Wow. Well, first of all, it's heartbreaking that artists have to leave Germany to get help from people who love them.
No, they get help from the cultural administration of the cities, of Berlin, of a cultural administration in the federal states, and of a cultural administration of the national government.
So it's just your money.
But this is not my business.
Oh, okay. Well, as far as your business is concerned, I want your money. So, yes, you can come to Detroit all the time and do lots of things, and artists can do lots of things. But to get back to the...
Well, I get an idea. Just talk to the people of the Goethe Institute and build up a cooperation with them.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
The easiest way to drag money out of Germany is to build up cooperation with Germany. So talk to Tiff, talk to the Goethe Institute, and go for it.
Cooperating. But to get back to your question about artists, because are you talking about artists pushing back against the government or the government pushing back against the inability to help artists? The latter. Well, I can tell you that the first thing for me is to recognize that there are people in every community, and it's very true in Detroit. You know, we all know those people who know somebody. So anytime there are grants, anytime there's money, anytime there's support, it's gone before some people even know it exists because somebody who knew somebody got it. So I am now the person for those people who didn't know somebody to know. I'm their person. And my first thought when we talk about, because it is a social impact which leads to social change, and it's to make sure there's justice in support. So just like Culture Source has 150 members, and a lot of them are people who are not those somebodies, my job is to make sure those people who didn't get heard and couldn't get heard because they got big-footed by other people have a shot. And if you can do that, that's my way to push back. So I don't want anybody to be offended who's used to getting whatever they get and doing whatever they want, but I'm about the people who are brilliant who haven't had a partner. I'm their partner.
Thank you very much.
And just let me just one aspect, because Rochelle told about the importance of building up infrastructures. Infrastructures are the basic means of access. And infrastructure is an art school, is an open space, is all what the communities have been built up. And now a government or the city is coming in and saying, okay, we build upon this. And this is a very intelligent approach from my thinking, because if you do not grant people with access, they will not be part of it. And being part of it is being part of art, and science is being part of another kind of thinking. And this is the basic importance of access, and we are talking about access. And then comes all the tricky questions: access to a health system. How can artists pay for a health system? What do you do with insurances, with the basic income, so that then it's getting tough. And then you have you will have tough discussions between you and the more economic-driven departments in the city. And you will need the support of the artists to stand in that political discussion.
I'm sorry, let me just. In case y'all didn't hear that, Tiff said, "I got your back." You don't know how much that means. And those discussions have already started. So I think a part of the reason the mayor hired me is because being a columnist here for 20 years, I have very thick skin and I'm not afraid of anybody.
Thank you for that. Nora, and this question is for Nora and Tiff. In your introduction, Nora, you mentioned the pushback that's occurring in Berlin with the artists to injustices like women making, I think you said, on average 8,000 euro, and men, male artists, making 2,000 more, 10,000 euro. What specifically does that pushback look like? How is that showing up? Can you give us some examples of what artists in Berlin are doing to push back against those types of injustices? And for you, Tiff, how do you see Detroit artists pushing back against issues of gentrification here, issues of marginalization here? Can you all share with us some of the things that you all are seeing in those regards?
I mean, it's a big question. There are many actions, I think, that have been taken, some of them more recent, and maybe regarding the gentrification and the housing and the studio situation in Berlin. We have now, I can observe there is much more solidarity amongst the artists, usually, and this is really a big risk and danger I think we are posing towards ourselves when we don't open our eyes and see that the market and commercialization of art is making us competitive and not, the other way around, that we now have to have more communal efforts in order to achieve something. Like, we really have to unlearn many things and like practice a new collective action and thinking and all of these kind of things. And that's what's happening. For example, we had large protests, and not just among artists, but artists were one strong group, I would say, amongst the housing situation in Berlin, and it was called even. So I looked it up, the English word for it, but it is a highly a loaded word in Germany. It's called enteignen. That means repossessing the ownership of housing, of houses, back from investors, for example. So there was a big protest. It was called just a big company's name, Deutsche Wohnen. That means German living. Repossess it back. Actually, just take it back. So that didn't happen yet, but of course there was a huge outcry. Like, how can they think that? Even how can they articulate that? But there were masses on the streets, and so this was maybe one part. And then there are smaller programs which are, I think, very important symbolically, that we have. Like, my studio is in this space in Berlin. It's the largest studio program which is organized only by artists, so self-organized. We have 60 to 70 studios and around 100 artists working there. And so we did an action, it's called Occupy Our Studio. So we invited other artists to come, because not every artist has a studio in Berlin, because it's too expensive, then it's not enough space, even in this large city. So yeah, that's also a thing I can think of now. But there were really, really many actions, and I deeply believe there are many actions needed. And yeah.
What are people doing? Personally, Brandon, I don't really know. I only can really speak from my perspective. I mean, I think pretty much this year I kind of been like just in my studio trying to put my head down and, figure out what development looks like for me on an artist's budget. Because with development increasing and construction rates increasing, it's no joke dealing with commercial space. So, I mean, I have several colleagues that are buying buildings with no roofs, because that's what we can afford. But I think there's a lot of artists that are really still focusing on their work being shown than it is them holding down spaces, Even though I know that it is important to a lot of people to have a space to practice. And it's very difficult to find space to practice. Even though I have real estate, it's taking time to develop. And I was displaced from my previous live-work studio, which was semi-affordable. So the semi-affordable spaces here are not safe for artists. So we have a lot of that's going on as well. But I don't know, to me, I don't see enough artists that look like me that are talking about buying space personally. I would like to see more of that. I think we need to have more conversations about what that looks like. I don't think that we can wait any longer to have those conversations. And, you know, I'm always down to like share resources, talk, collaborate, but it has to be right, you know. Because, you know, with the school idea, you know, artists still need a space to convene because it's not necessarily going downtown to the newness. Even though I participate in a lot of the newness, I'm just like, this is Detroit. Okay. So it's like, yo, how can I, you know, create space for the creatives just to convene as well? So I don't know. I'm just trying to focus on a larger plan to where I am thinking not only about my own professional practice, but I am thinking about how visceral the development is and how I don't see reflections of myself in a lot of the places here in Detroit, and I think that's sad. And it pisses me off.
Thank you. Shifting gears slightly, I would like to talk to all of you and get some feedback. I think it's important that we look at concrete examples, particularly when we talk about issues of access. And I also think it's important for us to think about who is modeling, who is exhibiting some of the things that we want to see. Where are these things happening so that we might be better able to implement the best of, sort of best practices in terms of social impact or art for social impact, art for greater access, art for social change. Do you all have any maybe shining examples or places that you look or instances where you see art being effectively leveraged for social change? And if so, what are those spaces and what makes you identify those as being particularly valuable?
Well, I can tell you that one of the things that the city planning and development department did as a gift to me as I set up a department for arts, culture, and entertainment was to go and look at 10 cities around the country and around the world and see what they were doing. And I said, you can look at everything you want, but what I need to know is where they get money, how large they are, whether they own property, and how many artists they help. I just got that report today while I was away with the mayor, so I don't have it yet, but I can tell you the two things that I heard just briefly while they were talking about it was the Arts Council of Indianapolis has its own gallery connected to it to make sure that they provide a space in addition to all the other spaces that they do. And Miami has a $53 million budget just to give half of that to grants to artists. So I'm glad you asked. I'll have an answer for you. It's sitting on my desk. But I'm very interested in making sure that whatever money is coming into this space for art goes to artists who need that. And what I heard on a listening tour around the city, I went to every district and talked to artists and residents. And it was a listening tour, so I didn't go to make a speech or say what I wanted because it's not about what I want. I wanted to know what they had that they loved and were proud of and wanted to make sure got some support, and what they didn't have that they wanted in their district and in the city. And the two things I heard in every district was space and some type of commemoration or celebration or promotion of what they do. They wanted people to know what they were doing, and they need space. And I said, this is Detroit. We've got more space. We got houses and buildings, I mean, literally more than any other city in America. So that should be easy. Of course, it's Detroit. Nothing is easy. But there's an answer in there somewhere. So that's a part of what I'm working on, Tiff, is to make sure that artists have space to work, have space to talk to each other, have space to show what they're doing, whether it's performance or, you know, actual art. And I think we can do that.
just talking about space, I don't know if Dimitri Hegemann is here. Hi. He can talk a lot about spaces in Berlin 30 years ago. And I think it's worth listening to him because he just occupied spaces and developed it into something. And yet, you're absolutely right. Spaces is primordial, as infrastructure is. And you have to keep out some types of infrastructure, keep it out of the market. It cannot be, because those basic infrastructures will not be funded by a market. There are too less individual interest to create such infrastructures. So there's a society who has to decide upon it. And this is a political fight to be fought. And second is time. Be patient with Rochelle, be patient with those who try to change institutions. You may see in that very moment that there's a German saying is, lies have short legs, and truth is very slow. So lies are running very fast. Don't trust in messages running too fast. Rely on truth, and truth will take time. And to change institutions will take time. So that's perhaps something to build up a mental infrastructure, which is important in these times, not to rely on Twitter and all the fast messages, but to work through a problem and then to build up a mental infrastructure which will open the hearts and the minds for the need of arts.
Did anybody else want to weigh in on that one? Okay.
Yeah, no, I have a good example, but it's not exactly an answer to the exact question, but I think maybe it's not everyone here in Detroit knows that. And I'm a person, an artist, who is complaining a lot about the German institutions and the situation, as you might say, but there is one thing which is amazing, and it's not, let's say, it's not left unchallenged. It's, for example, the artist insurance system in Germany, which it's like super affordable. It's only for artists. So you have to kind of prove that you're an artist through, for example, a history of exhibitions or even just media coverage of your work. So yes, there is an entry barrier to that. But if you once have it, then you have that, and you have an insurance for super cheap money, and this is actually a great thing. But it is challenged from time to time, even though it's not a big cost for Germany. And I mean, the numbers I stated in the beginning, I think we have a problem if the average income is so low, and basically almost every artist lives in precarity, and I don't really know why Germany is affording that, right? We could do better, and I really don't get it. For example, the discussions about a basic income, maybe it's also just a matter of patience and time. I'm not the best patient person, and I would love to experience that in my lifetime, though. So I'm going to say that over and over, but the insurance thing is definitely a best case or something, yeah.
That's an excellent, actually, that's a really great example of what I was asking for the question. Tiff, you wanted to respond as well?
Yeah, I was gonna say that usually in most cities, when it comes to like development and construction, they have like a certain percentage that is dedicated to art. And I mean, as much as new stuff we've seen around here, like I'm just saying, like we could have had grants, more community centers or something,
I can just tell you that the proposal that I've been preparing for the mayor since I arrived, I feel like a member of Congress trying to get a bill out of committee so the president can even see it. And the biggest pushback I got was on anything having to do with either taxes or fees on development. So that's my big battle, because I'm not giving up. They're under the impression, because we just came out of bankruptcy a few years ago, that developers will not do that. And what I need to make sure that they understand is, oh, if you make them, they will come. So pray for me.
We're going to get to the Q&A period very briefly here. I have one question, and we might not have time for everybody to address it, but I do think it's important, particularly with the topic at hand here, which is access. How do you all, as within your professional and creative capacities, how do you see technology being leveraged in the context of art for social change? In many ways, technology has opened certain doors, but simultaneously made some pathways and passageways to social change and social impact more narrow. How do you all see technology being used in its best way to create more access, to create more positive social impact and change?
That's a great question, and actually I forgot to say something in the introduction round and the beginning. Why I like to think about technology in an emancipatory way is because many institutions, and I like to call them the colonizers, they don't understand technology, and that makes it for me like a counter space where we can actually do things in the moment. And I'm always like, not just me, but we're many people who do practice that kind of emancipatory space in the digital as a social practice. Actually, we are always a step ahead because institutions are slow. So that's great, and actually the virality, like the digital space, to me, it is another public space. And it is actually populated also by other classes, by other people. And not just like, it has not that kind of borders, it has other borders and other problems, for sure, yeah. I don't want to praise everything about it. But especially in an artistic practice and in a media artistic practice, for me, it can help actually towards a democratization of my art, because I can share it, I can discuss it, I can reach completely other people who would never go into a museum or who would never go into a gallery. So there is really, really a lot of good potential, and I already used it, and I can just encourage people. And by using that digital public space or virality as a public space, I don't mean self-marketing or Instagram or anything like that, or self-representation. So I don't know. I don't know how popular Instagram is in the US, I guess very much, but I'm a media artist. I don't have an Insta account, and I'll never have one. And, and I do this very consciously. Yeah, so I mean it really as a more emancipatory and as a more aware and political space, actually.
Thank you.
The only thing I want to add is, well, I could answer it two ways. I'm one of those people who hates the phrase and the idea of hidden figures, where you have African Americans who have done amazing things, and then when they're almost dead or after they're already dead, people celebrate what they did. Thank God Katherine Johnson got to see the film about her life. If you are a brilliant artist and you create something in the woods and no one ever sees it, does it matter? Well, it matters to you, but I want it to matter to a lot of people. So I, like you, have a real problem with Instagram and the flighty sense of anything that's up there really mattering. But I'm a Twitter fiend. You can follow me at Rochelle Riley. But I do think that every artist should have a website, just so people know your identity. You can make them come see everything else, but they can see an example of who you are. And I think anytime that we use technology to expand or to ensure the promotion of somebody who deserves it, that's a good thing. I don't necessarily agree with all the digitalization of, sort of quick art. That's not, for me, not so much art as play. But for real artists who need to be seen and heard and people need to know what they're capable of, that's when technology can be a great friend.
Just to add two thoughts. First is, yes, on the tool base, it is important to consider the digital space as a space, which has to be defined and which has to be considered, or we have to reconsider if this space is to be exploited by market economy or not. And so ask all the Republica guys what they are doing. I think it's very important what they are doing to define that public space. Secondly, yes, for an artist, it may be important to use that tool to also be there, because there's no difference between a traditional analog space and a digital space. But then there's one thing I would just put it on the table. in the upcoming years, our sense of, or our definition what is humanity will be challenged. And what is considered now as artificial intelligence will not be considered to be artificial in 5 or 10 years. What we consider today, how we deal with nature, by exploit nature, by make a difference between human and nature, will not lead us to any sustainable policies towards humanity. And by an economy based only on production, we will push our citizens, fellow citizens, to be consumers. And this is not the future of the human, to be a consumer. Or go to the Far East and you see a society based on a consumer capitalism.
Well, thank you all so much for such a rich discussion on art for social change and social impact. We'll take a few questions from the audience. We don't have much time because our conversation has been so rich. I can barely see because I'm blinded by the light. Okay, we've got, yes, a question over here.
Oh, me. Okay, hi. So I want to talk about artists as owners, and difficult. It's not easy to own in Detroit. So as a person, I got like Tiff, got tired of talking about it and decided to buy property in Detroit as an artist here. Not because I want to live here forever, just because I want to own here, and plan to own more. But I was literally treated like a drug dealer in the process. And so when you don't work for somebody and everything has your name on it, with lots of black names like Black Women Rock or more black, everything says something that's not. And so the struggle with banks, like what is the relationship with banks and artists, and how do we get them in the loop to make sure that they are doing their due diligence as supporting artists in the city? Because without banks and people giving us mortgages and trusting that, yes, I know I don't work for a Fortune 500 company, I am the Fortune 500 company, like getting them to understand that we are the corporation. I'd like for you to speak about if the struggle or the pushback that you got becoming an artist as owner and an institution builder.
Oh, I got a lot to say about this. Probably starting with the tax bill that I just got for 2017 prior to me owning the property for $14,000. I've acquired in many departments within the city about what's going on. Even how I acquired the property was a program. It was like the first right of refusal. So the building was supposed to come clean, but it still has $14,000 on it that they're expecting for me to pay, or they're threatening to take my building away. So I think that's interesting. Also, things that have been happening to me is being ticketed. Not necessarily for what I would consider blight, but it was definitely around the time where they thought Tiger Woods was going to come through and play at Palmer Woods. And so all of a sudden, Wyoming, that's been looking a hot mess for as long as I've been alive, has now been receiving tickets. Also, there's this thing that Detroiters, we get fined because it rains based on the square footage of our roofs and our cement, I guess, that we have. So for my size property, I guess that would be like $400 a month, even though I don't have any electrical or plumbing hooked up to my building. So the first thing that I did was try to remove all the damn asphalt so I can have permeable grounds so the city of Detroit won't tax me. But I imagine next week, starting Monday, I will be in all of everybody's offices trying to figure out what is good, because what I intend on doing with this space is making it a community center for the people in my neighborhood. So it's no joke.
All right, other questions? Yes.
Thank you. I just want to thank y'all. You guys are such an amazing, amazing group of people. My name is Fatima. I'm a community organizer in the city. I actually do a lot of work at the intersection of art and organizing. And one of the things that I do, Rochelle, I'm just like, how can we help you, right? Part of the thing, I wear a lot of different hats. I run communications for Ibiza, and I'm also a movement politics organizer with Michigan United. And one of our things is when we get our people like you in office, it's like we don't just send you there and let you float on your own. How can we help you, right? So if you have an uphill battle, we're here to make sure that you win it, right? The thing is, and I'm gonna keep it a buck with y'all, right? Because I got a lot of good folks in the mayor's office, but there's a lot of distrust around the mayor and the city's government, right? Based on what's happening to a lot of the folks in our communities. So when we are trying to help these artists, how are we gonna kind of, I don't wanna say pitch it, but basically be like, hey, let me help you out, and this is also not going to be compromising your narrative, because a lot of times in our end, it's like, oh, you took money from the city, you got Duggan money, oh, you're not down. You know what I'm saying? Like, you are no longer, you're compromised now. And so I'm just curious to see how, you're willing to navigate that space. And any way the community can help you get your work done in the city.
First of all, thank you so much. I appreciate that. The two things I have told people, and I haven't heard a lot of that, but that's because people know me. For 19 years, I had no problem criticizing anybody and everybody. And it didn't matter who they were, and it still doesn't. I brought my cards with me that have my email address and my cell phone. I bought a cell phone for myself that will be my city cell phone, so if it's ever subpoenaed, they don't take my personal phone, they take that phone. I am not going to change who I am, so people know that. If I ever quit, it's because something happened. I'm not going to, be involved in anything that's wrong. The biggest way you can help me is from the day I took the job that we don't turn back. We don't go back to a time when we didn't support artists. We don't accept excuses for why we don't do things. And one of the things that I literally want to make sure of is that if there's an artist that needs space to work, we got space. So we're going to figure out how to make that work. The second thing is, Tiff, I want you to bring me that tax bill. Just bring it to me. I'm sitting here so angry as I'm hearing some of this stuff, and I know how bad it is, and I know how long it's been bad. But here's the thing, Detroit was bad for a long time, and it is not so bad anymore, which means things can change. And the only way things can change is if we refuse to accept what used to be. So now that you have a partner downtown, not just help me, but use me. That means when something is happening, tell me, because I can't fight a battle I don't know about. Let me know when something is happening in a neighborhood. Let me know if something is happening with an artist. When I sat down and had lunch with Shifi because of what happened with the arrest, I wanted to, literally, I didn't know, we hadn't met. I just wanted to apologize to him. We now work together, and the first thing he said was, the day after I got arrested, Twitter shut my Twitter account down. I said, what are you talking about? I made a phone call. It was back up the next morning. I can do that if I know. So the biggest thing is stay in touch with me, use my cell phone, call me when you know stuff, call me when you need stuff, and my job literally is to connect all these people who say they want art with the people who can provide art. And if we take art as seriously as we take politics and BS, then we will be good, we will be okay. So that's how you can help me most, is make sure that that bridge stays open and that we're talking to each other. So if you hear something crazy, call and tell me. That's number one, because I don't do crazy, and I'm not going to change who I am for anything. Thank you.
All right, I think that concludes our panel. I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank all of you in the audience for coming to listen in and learn and contribute. If you haven't already, please review the biographies. It's available on the website of Republica to learn more about these wonderful panelists. And please also feel free to engage them. We're all here for a reason. We're all here to learn. We're all here to have some positive exchange. Again, I'm Brandon Colvin, really happy to, absolutely you may.
Before you say I'm Brandon Coleman and we're leaving, go to the Library Street Collective, where Ingrid LaFleur is curating an amazing, several exhibits in one space, so you can see what's happening. And the only other thing I want to say is a part of her exhibit is this amazing thing that was on a billboard and it's now on posters, and I'm going to have it on my wall in my apartment. There are black people in the future. So love Detroit, because we are not going anywhere. Thank you.
Thanks again. That concludes our panel.